Alright, today we're going to review the Tarptent Dipole 2. It's a new tent model for the 2022-23 season. And it's an ultralight two-person trekking pole tent. So I want to show you how I set it up, go over some of the features of the tent, what I like about it, things I don't love, and then we'll go over weights and ground. So one thing that's unique to this tent is that it has these collapsible carbon fiber tent pole struts at the center of both the head and the feet. They go together really simply, just like that. And they have a system that keeps them connected to the main body of the tent, so you don't have to put these in a different stake bag or a pole bag. All right, so with this particular tent here, after you have the two struts, you just do the four corners. You try to get as rectangular a pitch as possible, and then you put the poles in after. All right, so I've got my initial pitch all set up. The next thing I like to do is put the poles in. I find I can get a little bit tighter of a pitch in the apex if I do the poles next and the tensioners on the rope last, even though the video on Tarptent's website shows tensioning those cords next. So. All right, I've got my poles in. I got a nice tight pitch with the apex here. So the next step is to pull the tensioners that are right on the struts. All right, there you go. This is the basic pitch all set up with just the four stakes in the corners. Let's do a quick walk around the tent so I can show you some of the features. So one of the most unique things about this particular tent is the carbon struts that are at the foot and head. The tent is symmetrical, so there isn't a designated foot and head end, so you can set it up either way. So this carbon strut here does fold in half to make it a lot easier to store, which I'm a big fan of, because I can fit this easily in every pack that I have, unlike some of the other tarp tent models, such as the Notch. The poles just are too wide to fit in an ultralight pack. So it has these unique line locks here that go to these cords that are anchored off of the same stake as the four corners. So it adds a lot of structure to the tent and really lifts up the middle. It provides a lot of stability. However, one thing to keep in mind is that because you have two separate angles on that stake, you start to incorporate increased load on those stakes with a principle called vectoring. The inner body is adjustable. You have these loosen and tightable straps here, so you can tension the floor as needed. You'll notice there's this big mesh window that can have a waterproof cover on the inside collapse down. So I've rolled back the vestibule doors on this tent so you can see from the side profile. You'll notice up top it does include additional cordage for guying out the apex. Nice vent up top that does have a stiffening material to help hold it open. Like a lot of modern tents, it has a nice magnetic strap system. So another thing you can see right here is that when it is possible to set up your trekking poles in a way that you mostly get them out of the way of the door if you make them a little bit longer and you turn it sideways. So for example, this pole right here on the slightly downhill side of things is set to 120 centimeters and it's perfect. The uphill side, I had to shorten slightly. So here we have the uphill side with, of course, the vestibule doors closed. All right, here I want to show you how you can get the vestibule door up and also how the inner body works too. One thing that I do really like about this model is that it does have two-way zippers. So you have the ability to increase the size of the vent up top by quite a bit. You can also use that to insert your trekking pole down in to get up to this cup here, which is kind of a nice option too in case maybe it's pouring or something. One thing of note is that in this apex right here, there is a metal grommet that's designed to have your spike end of your trekking pole go up into it. The vestibule comes with this particular line lock adjusting clip. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely certain what this is for. I don't know what soft material loop is meant to go into there, if it's supposed to be like a pull cord on a stake or what, but I don't know about this. Maybe somebody else does. If you do, let me know in the comments. So you do have a waterproof zipper. And the magnets are pretty nice and strong. They give a positive snap to them when you put them down. The door just goes from the bottom and up to the apex here, so it is just about a half panel. It does have the double zippers. They talk about it being hands-free. The way that I pitched up currently, I would say you do need to hold this down. But one thing that is really nice is that when you roll this up, there's a separate, let's see if I can show you. There's a separate magnetic attachment here that's designed to go to the same magnet here. Not as hard as I made it look. Let me take you inside the tent now. So from the side profile, hopefully you can see it's absolutely enormous inside. There is a ton of space. So to put it in proportion, hopefully this helps. When I move my feet down to just a few inches from the end there, I have size 11 shoes. So you'll notice that it takes me to put both of them end to end and I'm still not quite touching the roof. And if I spread my legs as wide as I can, I'm sitting right in the middle, of course, I can't touch the corners. And then if I turn around to give you an idea how much room there is from the head, I have a ton of room up there. In fact, this is so roomy for a two-person tent that I can lie on my back dead center and go spread eagle with my 2 feet and my arms up as far apart as I can, and I can't touch a single one of the corners, or I should say, can't touch the corners. All right, so here hopefully you can see a better idea of interior space. In terms of peak height, I have quite a bit of room. I'm not on a pad right now, but even when I have a 3-inch thick pad, I still don't hit my head on this, and I'm 5'11". All right, let me show you how these vent windows work. So they have, it's this strip of dynamic composite fabric material that's sewn into the seams here. And it's hard to see in this video, but there is a plastic clip, it's almost like a modified cord lock. I'm sure this has a special name. But when you pinch this, you can take tension off of it, and you can move this down to any level that you want. And then this material here is waterproof, and you can simply bunch this down. And so when you do that, it opens up another end of mesh, of course, which Obviously helps with views and ventilation. Nice cross breeze to reduce condensation as well. You can do it partial way if you want. Something like that. But there you go. So inside, let me show you what it looks like to close up the vestibules. It's a really convenient way to close it up because of the magnetics. You can just grab it on both ends, undo it. There's a two-way zipper. And it's as simple as that. One of the things that's unique about this particular tent is that you don't have to stake out the vestibule or the apex. You can for reinforced structure and stability. However, you don't have to. So you can just set this thing up with the 4 stakes like I did, and you have yourself a tent that can roll at both sides of the vestibule on both sides to get an amazing cross breeze through here. The vestibule isn't the biggest thing in the world. It's very wide and very tall. But when you don't stake out that bottom piece there of that cordage, it isn't huge. Closing the inner door is very simple as well. Because it's magnet, you can just pull, it undoes itself. The pockets are pretty huge. I wear a size large glove, so I can easily fit my entire hand on there. So you do have these condensation drains that are on all 4 corners. So the concept is condensation rolls down along the roof into this waterproof fabric and can exit outside the tent there. This waterproof material is sewn into the floor and the mesh right on it. So if you take the time to make this pole be a little bit overhanging so the top is a little bit further out than the bottom, you can make it so rain shouldn't drip in unless it's really raining sideways. I've added some gear so you can see what it looks like with things inside of it. So to give you an idea on the height and everything, that's a 50-liter Superior Wilderness Designs long haul pack. Pair of shoes. So I have things up touching, or at least close to the head end, not quite touching. This yellow mat here is a wide width. And there's at least 18 inches, maybe even almost 2 feet. The Z-Lite mat over there is a standard width. So just barely touching here. There's enough room for my pack to go down completely sideways, which is a lot of interior space. I want to show you what it looks like when you have the vestibule staked out. So there is plenty of room in there for a pack standing upright. You can lean right against the pole, which is nice. However, though, when you don't stake that vestibule out, you don't get as much usable space. So for comparison's sake, these are the same exact shoe model, same size, both 11s. And you can see that they don't quite standing out, which of course you could turn them sideways, but I did that just for reference. Here is one more glimpse of what the vestibule looks like when it's not staked out. So I could easily turn those shoes sideways, put them a little closer. And for the empty pack, there's nothing in it right now. So here I have the vestibule staked out, and you can see that it has a nice big panel blocking wind, but that gives you space that if you needed to cook right outside or something like that. So one thing that I want to point out about the Dipole series, and this is of course the Dipole 2. One of the things that I like most about this tent, and this would be particularly true for the Dipole 1, is if you were to lie dead center, like this pad is right now, you'll notice that the highest point of the roof at the head and the feet ends is in the center because of that carbon strut on the outside. So one of the things that does is that brings the material further away from your face, so when you're breathing out all that air at night, it just helps prevent the condensation from forming right in front of your face. The other thing is, unlike any other trekking pole tents that I've seen, because this has these windows, if you're able to, you can get really good ventilation through here. I mean, look how open it is. The other thing is for your sleeping bag, when you have the raised panel right there, you just are that much less likely to get condensation on the top of your footbox because more of that water vapor can make its way up and away from your sleeping bag. So one thing that's remarkable about this tent is for how big it is and how much open space that it has, it should be really affected by the wind. And it sort of is, but one thing that's amazing about it is how good of a pitch you can get if you take the time to guy out the 4 additional spots, so meaning the head and the foot end and then both the apex. So I'm going to do that right now. I'll fast forward it, but I'll show you afterwards how stable this thing actually gets. All right, so for reference, going through and sticking everything out and tightening it, basically putting it in like storm mode, took me about 4.5 minutes. So I have added cord that goes up to this ring here. The reason for this ring and this big, long, adjustable nylon strap instead of just cord locks is because it is designed that if you're using this with 2 people, you can, instead of that carbon fiber strut there, you can use another set of trekking poles at their lowest settings. It's designed so that way the tip of the trekking pole can go into this ring and you can stake it out that way as opposed to having to use these carbon struts, so it saves a little bit of weight. So this is how I've got it set up. So this is how I guess you're supposed to use this. So I put that little connecting clip to the loop of my main apex line, and I use that to pull the base of this out. But to give you an idea, especially like apex strength in the top, like it's really solid. You know, getting close to drum tightness. Same thing on this end. So this tent has a lot of amazing features in space, but there's no such thing as a perfect tent for every situation. So let's briefly talk about the very few things about this tent that are possibly concerning to me or just aren't my favorite. So one is you just can't get around it. It's enormous, and that's great, and it has its drawbacks because you can fit 2 people super comfortably inside. In fact, this is tent so big that I think it's too big for 1 person, where a lot of people like to go with something like the Z-Pax Duplex. That tent is much smaller, so it's great for 1 person, but this is so roomy that you might have a bit too much space in there to justify the amount of footprint that it takes to set up. So you might have a hard time finding a place to pitch it, is my point. I haven't been in bad enough weather with this to see how the windows work. You can get them up pretty high, but I imagine if you just got crazy wind coming at the foot end like that, the wind would be pushing through that screen and making its way up through the top of the tent, which might be good for ventilation, but it might not be the most ideal. I will update on that as I sleep in more storms. I'm a big fan of how the vestibule does not have to be staked to be used, but right now with even just a moderate breeze, you can see that that's an enormous panel that's exposed to the wind right now. The wind it's just a breeze, but it's coming out of the west, so you can see that whole panel moving back and forth. If you pitch this incorrectly and you have too much tension between that corner and that corner, you can put too much pressure on the zipper. So you do have to be careful to get that really good rectangular pitch with each of the corners having a 45-degree stake. If you don't and it's too tight, you can put a lot of strain on that zipper where if you can try to force it closed, but you're putting a lot of stress on it. So I would just be careful of that. All right, I'll show you how I like to take it down. So the first thing that I do is I make sure that all the vestibules and inner tent doors are all zipped closed. So you do have the choice here. You can either take the pole out through the top of the peak, through the vent by zipping the zipper down, or you can go from the bottom. It's safer to go from the bottom because then you're not dealing with the point as much, possibly stabbing a hole by your vent. But if you're very careful, I kind of grabbed my hand over the tip to reduce damage. You can take it out from the top. So far that's the best way that I've found to fold it up. Most importantly is it gets the two collapsed poles right next to each other. And there you have it, all put away. All right, let's go over weight really quick. So this is the included stake bag. It does come with these 4 9-inch nail style stakes. So the stake bag itself is very light at 4 grams or 0.2 ounces. If you add the stakes that it came with, which are the 4 that you have to use to set up the 4 corners, and you want them to be really strong because there's so much force on those corners. So that comes in exactly 2 ounces or 56 grams. For me, one of the things I really like about this is how strong I can get the pitch when I set it up with guying out the additional things. So for me, I carry 2 small things of cord in here, and that's for the head and the foot adjustments. 2 semi-strong stakes for that, so these are 6-inch nails. And then I do carry 2 of these little titanium shepherd hooks with it as well. So if you throw all that stuff in there, my total staking package is about 104 grams or 3.7 ounces. This is the stuff sack it comes with. It's quite light at 0.6 of an ounce or 16 grams. And then this is the main tent body. I do leave those apex guy lines attached there because I feel like they're really handy to have to make that extra room in the vestibule. So I just leave them attached. You could take these off if you really wanted to get the weight down. Make sure I've got everything up there, nothing. So on my scale, it comes out to exactly 1 pound, 10.1 ounces, which comes in at 740 grams. All right, let's talk dimensions. So packed size, I would say, if you really crammed it down, you could probably get it down to about 14 inches. And I would say it's probably about 7 inches in diameter. So it gets down really pretty small for what it is. All right, so who's this tent for? So at 1 pound, 10 ounces, I would still consider it in the ultralight category of trekking pole tents. However, it does weigh substantially more, about a half pound more than something like a duplex. But where this tent really excels over the duplex is how much space there is inside of it. It's enormous. You can easily fit 2 wide width pads if you wanted to. And also, I really like the 4 stakes in the corner. That makes it really nice to set it up with simplicity, just 4 stakes as opposed to most other model trekking pole tents out there need to have the apex guy lines staked out at all times and the vestibules to be able to close that way. So that's a great feature of that tent. So really, I think it's for 2 people. The Dipole 2 is so roomy that I think it's a little bit overkill for your average 1 person. However, do whatever you like. I would say where it really thrives is being a fully featured, super lightweight 2-person trekking pole tent. So to talk about my favorite things about the tent, The first thing has to be how spacious it is. It's just absolutely enormous. There's plenty of space for 2 people. I really like how you can use the vestibules or roll them up without having to stake them out. I think that's really convenient. On that note, when you set up this tent, there's just not tripwires. There's not guy lines going out from every which way. The tent is really compact in the way that it works with those line locks that use the carbon strut in the center. It just makes it so all of your cordage and lines are all really close into the tent. I didn't really think about it much until the first time that I slept in it, and I was walking around getting ready for bed as it was getting dark, and I just realized, like, wow, there's almost nothing to trip on this tent, and that was great. It's got unrivaled, unheard of ventilation capabilities for a trekking pole tent, for a single wall tent for that matter, because you've got the head and the foot that can have that window that can go down partially or a full way, and you can roll up both vestibule sides, on both sides. You can get a crazy amount of ventilation for a trekking pole tent. And it also gives you really nice views too. So that's pretty tough to beat. Drawbacks for the tent, price, it's very expensive, but that's because it's huge, right? It's just simple economics. If you have an enormous tent that's made out of really expensive DCF material, it's going to cost more. There's just no getting around that. So there is that. It does have a very large footprint that goes with being an enormous livable tent. So there's sort of drawbacks to those two things. Other than that, I can't think of a lot. A little bit concerned about how the tent might hold up in the wind if you didn't have the ideal 4 spots to stake out the corners. The way that those corners work is because they're getting pulled on in 2 different directions, or like a vectoring force. You don't have the ability to extend that way out. Like if you tied a line on and you staked it out further at the other end of that line, you're not going to get the same angles that are going to be going to that carbon strut unless you break something really advanced. So there is the possibility that if you don't have good ground to stake it in, or say something like the snow, I could foresee it putting a lot of pressure onto those stakes and pulling them out because they are getting pulled from 2 different directions at once. One other thing to talk about with the Dipole is I feel like there is a lot of buzz comparing the Dipole by Tarptent to the Durston new tents, their Pro line, so the X-mid Pro 2 and the Pro 1. I would say that I consider them both to be great at what they were designed to do. And I think when you're comparing the two together, I think that personally with the Durston, you're getting maximum weight savings in a smaller footprint. You can't fit 2 wide width pads in the Pro 2. So you do go down to a slightly more smaller interior body, and there's pros and cons to that, including weight and finding a good spot to set it up. But where the Dipole really wins is interior volume. It's enormous. It's just absolutely huge inside. So if that's something that you value, I would recommend the Dipole. It's a bit of a different conversation when you're talking the Dipole 1 versus the X-mid Pro 1, because they're actually closer to each other than I would say the 2-person models are, because they are both very roomy 1-person tents. I do own the X-mid Pro 1, so I can't compare the 2 things because I have a 1-person of one and the 2-person of the other. However, that being said, from my reading on the Dipole 1, it also is very roomy for a 1-person tent. And so is the X-mid Pro 1. They're much closer in comparison. So I'd say that's a different conversation for a different video. But I think they're much more like each other in the 1-person models than the 2. They have a lot of similarities. Both of them just take the 4 stakes in nice weather to be pitched out. Both models can be guyed out to be very rigid. I think if I had to choose one to be in a really, really bad exposed storm, I would go with the Dipole. Just the way that you can get the apex and the head and the foot staked out. Everything's staked out in like a nice, linear, clean, symmetrical way. And I just feel like I can get a tighter pitch with that. I think that the benefits of the Durston models are that you do have that nice tucked out of the way vestibule space where your gear can just be completely out of the way, so you have really good entry in and out of the tent. The way that this tent works is you still do have that door and the trekking pole in the center, like almost every other trekking pole tent out there. I think that both brands did a really good job coming up with new innovative ideas for the next generation of tents. So something like this really pushes the limit. It really increases the comfort of livability when you're in a trekking pole tent with another person and it's crummy weather out. You have a ton of space inside. So it's up to you if you're willing to carry a little bit of extra weight and spend a little bit more money than on something like a duplex, where it's a lot smaller, and that's really just for 2 people lying down next to each other sleeping at night. Whereas this tent, there's a lot of room to really kind of get out and stretch. If you have any questions or comments on this tent, please let me know. I do have a consulting website. It's www.linksoutdoorsgear.com. You can contact me on there and we can talk about pretty much any kind of gear that you want. I appreciate you watching, and let me know in the comments below if there's anything you think I missed or if you have any questions. Thanks.